Good morning. Welcome to Central Christian Church. It's good to see everyone out on this beautiful summer morning. Announcements this morning. I would like to remind you that although the announcements on the paper that are available in the back indicate that the chair yoga classes are at 2 o'clock and at 4:30 on Tuesdays, that has changed. If you're interested in that program, it is now Tuesday at 4:30 only. Only a single session is being offered at this point. I think because school has started. And Robin asked me to read a note that has been received from a family that was served by the church recently. Pastor Robin and congregation of Central Christian Church, we extend our gratitude and appreciation for the assistance and guidance. Thank you for the lovely service and use of the kitchen facilities. We appreciate the help that was provided during the memorial service for our sister, Karen Sue Bartlett, on behalf of the Toothman family. And I think Linda has an announcement she'd like to make.
We had our Cricket Sport picnic yesterday, and we had 22 people attend, and I want to thank everyone for coming. We had a good time. Several people kayaked, and several people went out on a pontoon boat and played cornhole, and we all got to visit. So thank you. There were some cookies left over, and there's some cookies in baggies on the little table in the foyer, so as you leave today, help yourself. And our next membership function will be the Road Rally, which is September 25th. There's a sign-up sheet on the board in the narthex, so please sign up for that. We want to know how much chicken to buy. And there's information in the newsletter about that. And if you have any more questions about the Road Rally, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Well, I am glad to be back and to see some faces that are new and some faces that I remember too and know fairly well. So it's just good to see all of you. Alaska was beautiful. There's no way to describe it. Wonderful trip. But as Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz said, it sure is good to be home. Or no place like home. Let's stand together now as we call ourselves into our time of worship with God, who is always present, but we must bring ourselves into God's presence. I'm going to read Psalm 124 and 125 out of a paraphrase called Psalms Now. What cowards we are, we who claim to be the sons and daughters of God. How insipid our faith in an insecure and faithless world. The pressures increase, the old props fall away. Many of the old traditions and standards we held so dear are no longer relevant in our rapidly changing society. Even the proclamations and exhortations, the prophecies and promises that excited and supported us in our youth sound hollow and empty and frightfully inadequate in these times in which we live. The little boxes we wrapped around our God are breaking up. We can no longer hold on to Him in our expanding and exploding universe. Though we cannot hold on to God, He does hold on to us. Those who trust in the true God are more secure than the great mountains that rise above the clouds that cover us. Though everything changes around us, our great God cannot be changed. Though the sands may shift and even our institutions and governments and the ideals and aspirations of men and women give way, our great God is not subject to the impermanence of our temporal world. Though the storm sweeps over us, our relationship with our loving God is forever. What cowards we are, we who claim to be the sons and daughters of God. We don't have to be afraid. Let us have faith in God. Season. We praise you now in the heat of summer, but looking toward the cool of autumn, as we see the wildflowers on the road changing and the tall yokai darkening in color, we sense the promise of cooler days and the joy of fall activities. May we sense and yearn for your presence as much as we notice the changes in weather and the transformation in the world around us. Help us in this hour to draw nearer to your gracious heart, that we might be more complete. Amen. You may be seated.
Scripture this morning comes from the Old Testament, the book of Esther, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all of the provinces of his kingdom, to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under custody of Agag, the king's eunuch who is in charge of the women. Let their ointments be given them, and let the maiden who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the capital, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was beautiful and lovely, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edicts were proclaimed, and when many maidens were gathered in Susa, the capital, in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken in the king's palace, and put in the custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the maiden pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her ointments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. May God bless the reading of his holy word.
Teach my soul to rise to you when temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. To teach my soul to rise to you when temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need
I often say we could go home after that. And as I was sitting there listening to the beauty of their music, I'm afraid to say this because I'm being recorded on Facebook, but I am 99% sure that the book of Esther does not say the word God in the entire book. You added the theology this morning, so everyone hold on to that. We need God, and God is with us. Because as I prepared the sermon, it suddenly hit me that the sermon's kind of a commentary on humanity. My prayer probably brings it all together, but the sermon doesn't quite. But so thank you. Think about God. And thank you for all the hard names, too. You did a great job. We get kind of caught up in those old names, and it can kind of cover up the story. So, but we're going to unravel this story. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Esther is one of my favorite books. And we will, the next few sermons will be in the book of Esther, so we'll hang on. It'll kind of, hopefully, fall in line. But Marianne Yurkovich, and I did not get permission to say this, Marianne, I apologize if I'm wrong, gave me this wonderful book called The Story. Haven't had time to go through it. But I thought, I'm just going to read the part about Esther. It is written by Max Lucado and Randy Frazee. Takes the Bible and runs you through the Bible as story, which is my favorite way, because the Bible is literature. One of my goals in life, or whatever, purposes in life as a minister, is hopefully to draw people into the Bible. It is a wonderful book. So often it's used to beat people over the head. And so those that are being beat over the head don't even want to pick it up. But it's a beautiful piece of literature, has wonderful stories in it. And just like C.S. Lewis and Charles Dickens, we can bring theology, we can hear the God in those books. And so we know the God in this book, but there's also beautiful stories about people, real stories that we can relate to. This one kind of begins once upon a time. It doesn't really say that, but there is no historical base that we know of to link all of these pieces, except that there was a king Xerxes. Ahasuerus is what he's called in our Bible. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew name. Xerxes is the Persian name. He did rule for 21 years, was a very powerful ruler. His name means hero man, or ruling over heroes, or hero among warriors. And so you can hear the power in that title. He ruled over a huge area. Susa, what it's called in the Bible, was a huge area full of provinces. Now this territory in today's map would be from India to Ethiopia. And you probably know your geography better than I do, but with the names of all these countries changing, and with age, I kind of lose my geography. I can't talk this morning. Geography. But this territory, if you think in your mind, Russia is huge. Underneath you have China, which is, maybe half of the continent or the area, not including Europe. So you have Russia and China to the north, and then India's down here. India is about a third over in China, just roughly. So think of a third over from China. Then we have Pakistan, Afghanistan, names that are in our news today, Iran, Iraq, Syria, a little north, Palestine, then down is Saudi Arabia. This is a huge area on this complete continent. And then he also ruled a piece of Africa, which is right along the edge. There's Egypt and Sudan, and then underneath is Ethiopia. And so he rules from way over here to way over here in a time which would be pretty much the known world at that time. This is an old story, and I loved talking to Trevor Merrill yesterday, and he said he didn't like these old stories because they're so violent. You know, our Bible is violent. It's got some tough stuff in it, and Esther is a tough book. And I want to be a little honest about it today. And so I'm going to invite you to enter this story. What I say is only a piece of what it really may be saying. So I hope it says to you different things. We'd love to share that later. But even though, and we talked for a little while about, yes, there's violence in there, and yes, it's hard to listen to, but we do need to read it and think about it, I think. If we hear stories of violence, it reminds us of how violent we can be, and in the ways that we can be hurtful to others. And so the story really begins in chapter 1. I'm going to just tell you the story quickly. But Ahasuerus, or King Xerxes, decided to have a banquet for all of the leaders of Persia and Media. And so that would be this area I was talking about, this huge territory. And it would be the military, princes, nobles, those who are leaders in all of this province. Well, his banquet was 180 days. It's half a year. 6 months of partying. It showed to his province how wealthy he was. With wealth comes power. We may not want to admit it, but those who have money have the best access to food. It's expensive to buy organic food in the grocery store. Now, I know there's controversy over whether that's really organic and whether it's good for you, but honestly, it's expensive to buy good for you food. The bad food for us is cheaper. Healthcare. Those with money get the better healthcare, can afford the better insurance. Protection. Wealthy countries have much more protection. If you visit around the world, there are a lot of countries that have very little protection for the people. Very scary places. So he was showing his province how powerful he was. Wealthy and powerful. Well, he decided then, after the 6 months, to have a 7-day feast. And so he got his palace all dressed up. It says, the garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. This was a party for men. Queen Vashti, on the other hand, had a party for the women. Maybe party, don't know, doesn't tell us, but she had a banquet for the women. The men are in this party where they can drink as much as they wanted, that instant gratification. And if you do drink, I mean, they didn't have to, everybody has choices, but if you do drink as much as you want all day long for 7 days, you kind of lose judgment for anything other than what one is doing. Kind of that lack of judgment for what the future might be. So we have this wild party, and then we have Queen Vashti. Well, in all of this, the king asks for Queen Vashti to come to the men's party. Now, it's a lot of men in this huge territory. We've been drinking for a long time, and she's asked to come in. Kind of interesting that she's asked to come in wearing her crown. We don't have children in the room, so maybe she was asked to only wear her crown. there are rabbis who think that may be. But she refused. And to refuse in those days could have meant death. So when she refused, the king went to the sages, who were the experts in the law and in judgment. And this is what Memucan said in the presence of the king and the nobles. Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who had heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. To me, that sounds very, very comical. And of course, probably the way I read it. But it's kind of interesting that the man that ruled the known world, this huge province, could not control his wife. And not only that, but if you let her get away, it's going to be catchy, and all the women in the province are not going to obey their husbands. Comical. But it happens. And we still do it today. If we can't control this entity, it might get worse and worse and worse. And that was kind of, I think, the idea when Hitler began to eliminate the Jewish people. It's that we've got to control them or eliminate them in order for us to keep our power. They need to disappear. And like I said, that was a light sentence. She could have gotten death. And so we hear that decree and we think, oh, that's crazy and that's wrong because we live in an equal society. But then there is another side to that. What you do does affect me, and we do all live together. But then the proclamation. Now, the sages said to tell Queen Vashti she could not enter the king's presence, but this is what happened. Let's see, I didn't mark it. So then what happened was a proclamation went out over all of the land, telling all the women that they had to obey their husbands. And so then, after this goes out, then they have the problem of replacing the queen. And so the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. You kind of see the instant gratification. Let's, kind of eliminate this problem, and we're just going to move on. And so he proclaims an edict that is going to affect all of the women in the nation, and it's set in stone, supposedly. Now, this is the most powerful man in the world, but yet he has to abide by this set in stone law. kind of shows the insecurity of those with power, and also the vulnerability of others. So the only power that Vashti had in that was to withhold her body. That was the only power that she had, and that, I propose, happens even today. And so because of the lack of moral discernment on those in power, it affected probably at least half of the population at that time, all of the women. But that wasn't the worst. And I say the morning after. It doesn't exactly say that in the Bible. It says after a while. You know, it could have been a week, 2, a month later, I don't know. But, you know, I kind of think about the morning after, when you wake up with that hangover, which I only did one time, and that cured me for life. I was very, very young, thankfully. But I've watched people wake up with hangovers. That day, even if you don't have a hangover, maybe that day of regret for what happened, that remorse, that icky, gut, yucky feeling about what happened and what am I going to do now? But instead of taking responsibility and ownership for his part in all of this, King Xerxes' part in it, and without making an effort to right what was wrong, he just asked his buddies. And the buddies said, oh, come on, we can fix this. You know, that impulsive, manipulative kind of behavior that we're just going to fix this all. And I can tell you it probably was no beauty contest. It said to meet the king's desires. So these women were taken and dressed up and sweetened up and prepared for the king so the king could try them out. It's a devastating use of power. Well, it wreaked havoc on all families who had young women in their homes, but it was especially frightening for Esther. And this is the part that we need to remember in the next few weeks as we continue her story. She was extremely vulnerable. She was an orphan. Mordecai adopted her, thankfully. Women who did not have the care of men in those days were in a very precarious position. She was female. We see that in the beginning of the story, where the king could give an edict that all the women had to obey. This was this vulnerability of the female population. But she was also Jewish, and that could not be known. And Mordecai told her, do not tell your nationality. That would have probably been instant death. But after the king had her, she would have been unmarriageable. That would have been a death sentence. We don't know about the Persian world, whether those young women would be unmarriageable. It could have been for them also. We don't know. So what is the moral of the story? Thankfully, you sang, God is with us and we need God. But I also think, well, I read this, and another commentator said, opulence doesn't cover ignorance. Wealth will not cover our ignorant deeds. Self-service and consumerism cannot ease the pain of bad decisions and regret. Another commentator said, be honest about the things that cause us regret. Make amends. Look for ways to ensure that it won't happen again, which is what I kind of talked to Trevor about. We read those so that we are reminded not to let these things ever happen again, and also begin to move forward. Let's not go backwards. Let's make it better, not the same or worse. But I say the biggest lesson from the beginning of Esther until the end in this wonderful book is that the only way to change the morning after is to think the night before. We have new faces here and are so glad to see